Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Lee Halliday and we are going to use the Recoil State Management Library to build this demo where when you click add, it adds a box to the screen. But wait, there is more. When you add two, it will draw a bounding box around them and then you can re-drag them and position them on the screen and it will dynamically update this bounding box to whatever boxes we have on the screen. So we can add a whole bunch and then move them around and it's always recalculating this bounding box in real time. So let's get started. So we're doing everything today inside of Create React App, inside of this one file with recoil.js, where I've already set up all of the imports and we'll go into what each of them does as we need them inside of this app. So here we've got export default function with recoil. So this is the component we're working with that outputs app. And this is where we're going to put our RecoilRoot. And RecoilRoot is a provider that provides state to the rest of our application below it, all of its children. So you want to have this as high up as you can inside of your application. And inside of here, we're going to put a component called create that will create below. And what this will do is return a button that says add. So saving this, we get our add button and we can just add a class I already set up, class name of add to style it a little bit. But when you click this, so on click, call a function, here's where we want to add a new box on the screen. But where are we going to put that box? We need to set up some state. So we'll come up here above our with recoil component and we'll define our state. So const box IDs state. And what this will be is an atom where the key is box IDs state. And our default value for this is an array. So why is it box IDs? Because this isn't going to store the box details themselves. It's just going to store an ID that points to another atom that we'll create later that has the X and the Y coordinates of that box. So it's just going to be a big array of IDs. And when you click this, we need to create a new ID. So we'll just say const ID is equal to new date to ISO string, to give us like a somewhat random ID. And then we want to take this ID and put it up here inside of our state. So we do that by using the hook, use recoil state. So that is use recoil state, and we pass it the variable here, box ID state. And what this will give us is the box IDs and set box IDs. So it's very much like use state from React. It will give you the value and then a setter function to tweak that value. So what we want to do here is call set box IDs. And we'll take a copy of the box IDs we already have and we'll add in our new ID. So you can't really see anything yet because I haven't shown this state anywhere, but this is adding some new IDs to our state up here. So next up, why don't we start showing these boxes on the screen? So we'll create a component called boxes. So function boxes. And what this will do is grab the box IDs. But here we don't need to set them at all. We just want to read them. So what we can use instead of use recoil state is something called use recoil value, which gives you like a read-only version of your state. So we want box IDs state, which will give us the box IDs. So then what we can do is we can just put these inside of a fragment and we will iterate over each of these box IDs. So we'll map over each ID and each one will render a component called drawBox, where we're going to set the key so it's unique and then we'll pass the ID down to the drawBox component. So it's going to fail because that doesn't exist yet. So we'll come down here and I'm actually not going to declare it as a function like this. I'm going to use const and we'll chat about that in a second. So const drawBox is equal to a function that will receive the ID. And for now, why don't we just return a div that outputs the ID. And if I add a class name to this called box, it will actually draw it as a box on the screen. So there we go. We're adding a whole bunch of boxes, but they're not draggable yet. But I want to make one tweak, and the reason why I declared this as const instead, I want to actually wrap the memo function from React around this. And this, it memoizes the function. And what that basically does is it looks at the props being passed in. And unless the props change, it won't try to re-render this. The only time it will be re-rendered is if the props have changed or some state internal to this drawbox component itself has changed. So that will make it a little bit more performant. Sort of as we're adding boxes to this array, it won't be trying to redraw boxes that are already fine and displayed on the screen. So the next thing we need to do is start to convert these boxes into something that's draggable. So for that, we use this draggable component from react-draggable. And we'll wrap this around our div. And I believe it already works. It drags itself around, but I want to change things a little bit. If I were to open up the console, it would probably be giving me this error that you need to assign a ref to it and it's complaining a little bit. So to fix that, let's actually see if it actually does have that error. Console, yeah, there we go. Find DOM node is deprecated in strict mode. So to fix this, you need to set up a ref. I've done this demo before, so that's sort of why I knew which errors I was going to run into and save you the hassle of me poking around on Stack Overflow for like 20 minutes trying to see what's up. So we'll declare our ref, use ref hook from React. And what you do is you add that as a node ref on the draggable. And then on the div itself, you pass the actual ref prop. So what that will do is basically get rid of that error, I hope. So add a new one. Yeah, you can see that it's gone now that we have refs set up properly. So what I want to do now is instead of sort of allowing draggable to control its position, I want to control this in state. But in order to do that, I need to set up state for each of these boxes that we're going to be showing on the screen. So I'm going to pop up to the top, and here I'm going to declare a function called getBoxState. And this is going to be a function that takes an ID. So one of the IDs we added up here to this state. And what it's going to do is return us an atom for that ID. So here we can say key is equal to box state, and then we'll put in the ID here. And its default value is going to be an X of 100 and a Y of 100. Basically the position of it on the page. But the problem here is that every time I call this getBoxState, it's going to return us a new atom. So what I can do is I've included this package mem, which is a way to memoize function calls. So very much like memo up here, but memo up here is sort of for components in React, whereas this is more of a general purpose, general utility memoizing function. And the way this works is you basically just take mem and wrap it around your function. And then what mem will do is if it sees an ID for the first time, it will call your function and return the value. And then it stores it in some sort of cache so that the next time it gets called with the same ID, it just reuses that value and doesn't recall your function again. So now that we have getBoxState, we'll just copy that and go down into our drawbox component. So here we want to get the actual box state. So we're going to set this up with box and setBox so that we can read its value and change it. And that will be use recoil state. But because there isn't a variable we can pass in like we did with this one here, when we pass that into box ID state, we need to call our function getBoxState and pass in the ID. And what this will do is the first time it will create state for that ID, and every other time it will just return us the same atom or the same piece of state we had set up previously. So now that we have the actual state here, box, we can modify its position. So position is an X of box.x and a Y of box.y. And another thing we want to do is listen for the onDrag event. So onDrag event is basically called constantly as you're dragging around that box on the screen. And it's passed two things. An event that we're not going to use, and then some data about where the position is as you're dragging this around. Data has the X and the Y attribute that we want access to. So what we can do here is every time it's dragged, we can say set box, and we'll just take a copy in case later on we add other state into this box that we want to keep track of, like the color or the size or things like that. And we'll update the X property to be data.x and update the Y property to be data.y. So let's try this out, see if it works. We can add a box to the screen. It's at 100, 100, and then we can drag it around. And if we were to put a console.log of, let's say, the X is data.x and the Y is data.y, just so we can see what's happening. Pop this open to the console, clear it out, add this, and see as I'm dragging it around, it's passing a ton of events about where this thing is positioned on the screen. So we'll just close this. I don't really need the ID in here anymore. I'm just going to say it's a box. So there we go. There's one box. Click it again. Now we got two. Now we got three. So why don't we just set this up so that when you add a new box, it's positioned randomly on the screen. I've got this little utility function called random between. So we'll copy this and we'll say, for X, I want a random number between 0 and the width of the screen. So window.innerWidth. And for the Y, I want a random between 1 and window.innerHeight. So now this thing will be randomly positioned somewhere on the screen every time I add a box. This one got placed off the edge. These boxes are 100 by 100. So what I could just do is subtract 100 from each of these so that it never places them off the edge of the screen. Perfect. Can add a whole bunch and they all look to be within the bounds of the screen. So the next thing I want to do is in the middle here, I want to put a total number of boxes that are on the screen. So what does this mean? It's basically a count of all of the boxes, the length of this array, box ID's state. So whenever you want to derive state values from other state properties, so whenever you want to compute a value from state, you use this thing called selector. And we will define this. Why don't we put it down closer to where we're going to be using it? I'll just put it here. So what I'll do is I'll create something called totals state, and this will be a selector. And selectors also need a key, so we'll just say key is totals state. But instead of default, you pass a get function. And what get does is it receives a function called get, and we can use this get function that's passed here to basically read values from other pieces of state that we have. So what we can do is we can say const box IDs is equal to get box IDs state. Not get IDs state, box IDs state. There we go. So this would return us our state back inside of here. And then what we're going to do is just return the length of that. So get box IDs dot length. So this little computed property that we're going to use in a second will basically listen anytime our box ID's state changes, and it will return the length of that. So however many boxes are in that array. So to use this, why don't we put this here and call it the big number in the middle of the screen. So function big number, like this. And what we'll do is return a div with a class of, I think it's called big number. And inside of here, we basically want to put this length, which is the total of however many box IDs we have in our state. So what we'll do here is we'll say const total is equal to use recoil value, because we want access to a read-only value of our state. But this time we're not reading from sort of state itself. We're reading from a computed value that comes from other properties in our state. So we'll pass in totals state. This will get the total number that we'll pass here. And when it re-renders, it starts out as 0. And as we add new ones, it automatically updates. Because whenever you use recoil value with a selector or with an atom, it basically subscribes to changes to that state. So anytime, in this case, our box ID's state changes, it will trigger a re-render for this total state computed selector. So with our big number in place, why don't we work on adding that dashed yellow line that sort of surrounds all of the boxes on the screen? So we'll do this by creating a new component called the bounding box. So function bounding box. And what this is going to do is return a div, where on the div, we're going to be setting some style properties. So we're going to set things like, say, top of 100, left of 100, width of 100, and height of 100. So all of these numbers are going to be coming from another selector that we're going to set up that's constantly computing values from the rest of our state. Just to give it a style here, I think it's bounding box. I've got this closed here, but I have a CSS file where I've declared a few properties for bounding box to give it this dashed yellow. Just close this for space, close that. Cool, so we have a hard-coded yellow box here that's not controlled by state, it's just sort of showing up randomly. But we're going to work on computing this bounding box so that we can have it dynamically update as we drag around these boxes on the screen. So to do that, we're going to declare something called, why don't we call it the bounding state? And it is going to be a selector because it's going to be computed from other properties of state. So the key for this will be bounding state. And we have a get function. So this receives get that we'll be calling. So we want to get access to all of the boxes for the IDs stored in our state here. So first, why don't we get access to all the IDs, and then we'll map them to get access to all of the boxes that those IDs represent. If that was a mouthful, we're going to do that right now. And we can do it in 2 steps just to keep it clean. So box IDs will be equal to get box IDs state. So that would give us all of the IDs. And then if we want the boxes, we want to say boxes like that. And we're going to map the IDs. So each one of these. And then we're going to call get. And we're going to call get on this function here, get box state. Which, when passed in the ID, returns the atom for the corresponding box that will be passed to this get function here. So if we were to console.log boxes, we can set that up. And I don't know if it actually gets called unless you have something that's subscribed to it, but why don't we see? So if I add one, it does, sweet. So there's only one of those boxes in here, or is that still the console? Oh, that's still this thing. Duh. All right, so I don't think it was actually doing anything. Drag this around, cool. So it's not actually being called yet. And I think the reason it's not being called at all is because we haven't set up anything that's going to subscribe to that. So why don't we subscribe to this bounding state? So we'll see here, const bounding is equal to use recoil value for bounding state, like this. Now if I add one, there we go. So as I drag it around, we've got an array of all of the boxes, so they're X and Y properties. We can add 2, 3, and here are the boxes that we've got going on here. So first we got all of the box IDs, and then we mapped them to get each of the individual boxes from its own atom in state. So what we want to do with all of that is basically map them to find the min and max of all of the X and Y properties. So we will put that inside of something called bounding. or maybe this makes more sense, boundaries, like that. So we're going to reduce these boxes. And when we're reducing, we are going to be given the accumulated value and then each of the boxes. And we'll do something with that in a sec. But what's our default value? We are going to have min x is null, min y is null, max x is null, and max y is null. So save that. And our job inside of here is basically to populate all of these initial values of the boundaries here. So what we'll do is we'll do each one at a time, where we'll say if ac.min_x is null and the box.x is less than the minimum x, that means we have a new minimum that we need to assign. So if that's the case, we'll say ac.min_x is now equal to box.x. Like that. So we now need to repeat this for the other, for min y and max as well. So we'll do if min y is null, and we'll check if the y is less than the min y, and if that's the case, we're going to assign the min y. And then we can do the same for max, so we'll just change this to max x, and we would want to say bigger because we're looking at max now. And then max y, change this to y, and bigger. So these if statements here, it would look a little bit better if it were, there we go, a little bit bigger, easier to see what's going on. Those are basically going through and making sure that we have the min and the max y and x values inside of our reduced value. And so at the end of this, we're going to just return the ac. So then at the end of the day, we have this boundaries that will contain the min and max x and y values inside of it that we are going to return. So boundaries, you know what, I don't like that it has a different name, so I'm going to change this to bounding to just match what we're calling our state here. So coming down, I now have bounding here. So if I were to console.log this out, the first time you see it's actually null because there's no boxes on the screen. So why don't we just say if bounding.min_x is null, we'll just return null. We're not going to show any box at all. So one thing you may have noticed is that there's a whole bunch of errors down here at the bottom. Cannot update a component batcher while rendering a different component big number. This is a known issue that I'll link to in the source code that I share at the bottom of this video. And it doesn't seem like there's too much we can do until the package fixes this themselves. It's basically anytime you're using a selector, it gets tripped up. I think with hot module reloading or something like that, there's a conflict. So I'm just basically ignoring it because there's nothing I can do to fix this right now. So the last thing we want to do is update these top left and width to basically put the bounding box in the right place. So our top is going to be bounding.min y, like this. So why don't we add one, 2. It's not showing up at all. So why don't we just keep going and try to figure out what's wrong. Bounding state, return bounding. I must have done something wrong. Let me just do some troubleshooting. Bounding, add 1. Okay, so the min and the min x and y aren't being set for some reason. So let's just take a look at why that might be the case. Oh, I want to say if it's or. So if it's null or this, that's, I think, the case. There we go. See, now you can see that it's updating correctly. So just to go over this logic again, if the min x is null or the current box's x is less than the min x, then override the min with the current box's x. It's definitely a mouthful. So coming down here, we're setting the top to bounding.min_y. We can set the left to bounding.min_x. See what it looks like. You can see the yellow starting to show up, but it's not really, it's sort of jumping around the screen, but it's not working yet. And the reason is because we need to adjust the width. So the way this will work, I think it's bounding.width is x. So I think it's max x minus min x is I think what it is. So why don't we try that? Max y minus bounding.min y. Add a couple. Okay, it's sort of working. But I think the last thing we need to do is basically add 96 to this. So why 96? Very good question. The reason why is because each of these boxes is 100 pixels. But if I were to do 100, it's going to be 4 pixels too big. You can see how it sort of sticks off the end 4 pixels. That is because we've got 4 pixels of border on this bounding box. So if I just remove the 4 pixels of border, it now should work perfectly. So as I drag this around the screen, it's constantly updating. And we'll just get rid of the console.log. Close our console here and add a few. And now it's working. So what we've done is basically we've created 2 pieces of state, box IDs, and then sort of a lie, right? We didn't create 2 pieces of state. We created one for the IDs array, and then we created another piece of state for every single box that we have on our screen. And from that, we're calculating 2 computed or derived values. We've got this number in the middle 4, which is just doing a count on the box IDs. And then we've got this really complicated bounding state calculation that's every time one of these is moved around, it's recalculating the min and max x and y coordinates so that it can draw this yellow dashed line around this whole thing. So this is the video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. It was fun to make. Take care. Bye.